The screens turned on by themselves, and Commander Jake Morrison knew something was wrong before the first image appeared. He was standing in the command center of Earth Defense Headquarters, when every monitor in the room flickered to life at the same moment. The other officers stopped what they were doing and looked up. Nobody had activated the screens. Nobody had given any command. The transmission was coming from somewhere else, and it had the power to override every system they had. The image that appeared made Jake's blood run cold. It was an alien face, and not one of the friendly species that humanity had met during their early exploration of space. This creature was massive with scales that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. Its eyes were too large and too dark, and when it spoke, the voice came through in perfect English, which somehow made it worse, the alien introduced itself as Speaker Zol of the Galactic Council, and then it said something that Jake would remember for the rest of his life. The Council had decided that humanity was a threat. Human expansion into the galaxy was happening too fast, and humanity was too aggressive and too unpredictable. The Council had voted, and the decision was final. Humanity would be taught a lesson they would never forget. Then the images started. Lieutenant Amy Foster was the first one to gasp. She was sitting at the communications desk when the feed switched to show Mars Colony 7. Amy had visited that colony 2 years ago when she recognized the central plaza. With its dome ceiling and artificial trees, people were walking through the plaza, going about their normal day. Children were playing near a fountain. A couple was holding hands on a bench. Then the sky turned white. The dome shattered and everything inside turned to ash in less than a second. The camera angle switched and showed the same thing happening to the residential sector, and then the industrial zone, and then the agricultural domes. Each one was hit with some kind of weapon from orbit, and each one was completely destroyed. The entire colony was wiped out in under 3 minutes. But that was just the beginning. The feed switched to Europa Station and showed the same thing. Orbital bombardment from ships that humanity couldn't even see. The station broke apart, and thousands of people were sucked out into space. The camera followed them as they died. It showed their faces. It showed them reaching for each other. It showed everything. Jake felt his legs go weak, but he forced himself to stay standing. Around him, other officers were not so strong. Lieutenant Danny Price fell to his knees and started screaming. His daughter worked on Europa Station. Past tense now. His daughter had worked on Europa Station. The broadcast continued Titan. Colony was next, and the aliens didn't use orbital weapons this time. They sent down troops. Ground forces that moved through the settlement and killed everyone they found. The camera showed it all in horrible detail. Families trying to hide in their homes. Workers trying to fight back with tools and bare hands. Children running through corridors with nowhere to go. The alien soldiers were efficient and thorough, and they made sure Earth was watching every single death. The communications officer, whose name was Steve Carter, tried to shut down the feed, but nothing worked. The transmission was too powerful. It had taken control of every screen on Earth, and there was no way to stop it. In homes and offices and schools all across the planet, people were watching humanity's colonies die. Mars. Colony 3 fell next, and then the mining stations in the asteroid belt. Then the research facility on one of Jupiter's moons. Then the farming community on Ganymede. Each attack was shown in full. Each death was recorded. The Galactic Council wanted Earth to understand what they were capable of. They wanted humanity to see the price of disobedience. Jake tried to count how many people were dying, but he lost. He tracked after the first billion. The colonies had been growing fast, and humanity had spread out across 12 different worlds in the solar system. Now, all of those worlds were being destroyed one by one. And there was nothing anyone on Earth could do except watch. The worst part was how organized it all was. The Galactic Council had planned this attack down to the smallest detail. They hit multiple colonies at the same time. They made sure their cameras captured everything. They timed it so that Earth would see the destruction happen live with no delay. This wasn't just an attack. This was a performance. A show of power designed to break humanity's spirit. Amy was crying now, but she hadn't looked away from her screen. She was monitoring the colony's signals and watching each one go dark. Her hands were shaken as she typed, but she kept working. Someone had to document this. Someone had to keep track of what was being lost. The feed showed Venus Station burning, and then the small outpost near Mercury. It showed the solar collectors being destroyed and the terraforming equipment on Mars being reduced to slag. The Galactic Council wasn't just killing people. They were destroying humanity's future in space. They were taking away every foothold humans had gained beyond Earth. 17 minutes after it started, the attacks stopped. The colonies were gone. All 12 of them. 10 billion people dead. The number was so large that Jake's mind couldn't fully process it. 10 billion. That was more than the entire population of Earth just 100 years ago. Gone in 17 minutes. Speaker Zal appeared on the screens again. The alien's face was calm as it delivered the terms. Humanity would stop all expansion beyond Earth's orbit. Humanity would dismantle its military fleet. Humanity would submit to Galactic Council authority. Compliance was not optional. Resistance would result in the complete destruction of Earth itself. Humanity had 1 year to obey. Then the screens went dark. The command center was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Jake looked around at the faces of his fellow officers and saw shock and grief and something else. Something dangerous. Something that looked like rage buried so deep it might never come back up. The door opened and General Lisa Crawford walked in. She was a tall woman with gray hair and a reputation for being tough but fair. Right now her face looked like it was carved from stone. Jake knew that her son had been stationed on Titan. She had just watched him die along with everyone. Else Crawford walked to the center of the room and looked at each person. Her voice was steady when she spoke, but there was something cold underneath it. Something that sent a chill down Jake's spine. She said they were not surrendering. She said they were going to war. She said the aliens had made a mistake by letting Earth survive. They should have destroyed humanity. Completely. Because now they had an enemy that would never stop, and never forgive, and never forget. Crawford gave an order. She told them to contact every military commander still alive. Every scientist, every engineer, every person who could help build weapons, or ships, or anything else they would need. She told them to prepare for a long fight. She told them that humanity was going to hit back, and when they did, the galaxy would learn what happens when you corner a species. That has nothing left to lose. Then she said 2 words that would change. Everything, Operation Alien Extinct. Jake felt something shift inside him. The shock was starting to wear off, and underneath it was anger. Pure burning anger. The Galactic Council had killed 10 billion people. They had destroyed families and dreams and futures. They had done it on purpose, and they had made sure Earth watched every second of it. They thought it would break humanity. They thought it would make humans obedient. They were wrong. Jake looked at Amy, who was still crying, and at Danny, who was still on his knees, and at all the other officers who had just lost friends and family. He saw the same anger in their eyes. The same determination. The aliens had wanted to teach humanity a lesson. Instead, they had created something far worse. They had created an enemy with nothing to lose and everything to avenge. The command center came back to life. Officers returned to their stations. Orders were given and received. Messages were sent out across Earth. The work began. Humanity had 1 year before the Galactic Council came back. 1 year to prepare. 1 year to build weapons that could fight back against an empire that spanned half the galaxy. It seemed impossible, but nobody cared. Impossible didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was revenge. Dr. Helen Park stood in front of the massive holographic display and wondered if she was about to become the worst person in human history. The equations floating in the air before her were beautiful in a terrible way. They represented something that should never exist. A weapon so powerful that it could end entire species across light years of space in a single moment. She had spent 3 months developing the theory, and now General Crawford wanted her to build it. The facility was called Site Omega, and it was buried 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains. The government had built it in secret years ago as a backup command center in case Earth was ever attacked. Now, it had become something else. It was humanity's forge of vengeance. Hundreds of scientists and engineers worked in the underground complex, and every single one of them had lost someone in the colony attacks. Helen herself had lost her sister and 2 nephews on Mars colony. 7 Colonel Ben Hayes stood beside her looking at the same equations. He was the military liaison assigned to the project, and he had a personal stake in seeing it succeed. His wife and 3 children had died on Mars. Helen had seen the photos on his desk. A smiling woman with red hair. Twin boys who looked a boo. 8 years old. A teenage girl with her father's eyes. All gone now. Ben never talked about them, but Helen could see the grief in the way he moved and spoke. It was like part of him had died with them. Ben asked her if the weapon would really work. Helen took a deep breath before answering. She explained that the theory was solid, but actually building it would require resources humanity had never tried to gather before. She told him they would need exotic matter and quantum processors more powerful than anything currently in existence. They would need to create conditions that normally only existed in the hearts of dying stars. It was possible, but it would take time and effort and probably lives. Ben leaned forward and told her to make a list of everything she needed. He said he would get it. His voice was completely flat when he spoke, and Helen realized that he didn't care about the cost anymore. Nothing mattered to him except making the aliens pay for what they had done. Sam Rodriguez was the lead engineer on the project. He was standing nearby listening to their conversation. He was a short man with nervous hands that were always moving. His entire extended family had been living on the colonies, parents and siblings and cousins and aunts and uncles. 23 people in total, all dead. Sam had stopped sleeping after the attacks, and now he worked 18-hour days without complaint. Helen worried about him, but she understood. Work was the only thing keeping any of them sane. Helen explained what the weapon would do, and even she felt sick describing it. The device would use quantum entanglement on a scale never attempted before. It would lock onto the biological signatures of the target species and then erase them from existence. Not kill them. Not destroy them. Actually remove them from reality as if they had never been born. Every member of the target species would simply stop existing in the same instant, no matter where they were in the galaxy. It was genocide on a level that made historical atrocities look small by comparison. Sam asked how many aliens would die if they used it. Helen did some quick calculations, and the number made her hands shake. The Galactic Council represented 15 different species. Conservative estimates put their combined population at around 6 trillion individuals. If the weapon worked as designed, all 6 trillion would cease to exist in a fraction of a second. There was a long silence after she said that number. Ben finally broke it by saying that the aliens had started this. They had killed 10 billion humans and broadcast it for the whole galaxy to see. They had made their choice, and now they would live with the consequences. Or rather, they wouldn't live at all. Helen wanted to argue. She wanted to say that this was wrong, and that genocide was never justified no matter what the other side had done. But when she opened her mouth, the words wouldn't come. Because she remembered watching her sister die on the broadcast. She remembered seeing her nephews running through the colony trying to find their mother. She remembered the moment when the orbital strike hit and they all turned to ash. And she realized that she wanted revenge just as much as Ben and Sam did. The project began in earnest the next day. General Crawford had mobilized every resource Earth had left. Factories that used to make consumer goods were retooled to produce quantum processors. Mines that had been closed for decades were reopened to extract rare materials. Universities stopped normal classes and started training people in advanced physics and engineering. Children as young as 12 were studying concepts that used to be taught only in graduate school. It was the largest coordinated effort in human history. Everyone on Earth was working toward the same goal. Build the weapon. Make it work. Kill the aliens. Nothing else mattered. Lieutenant Chris Palmer was in charge of gathering resources from space. The colonies were gone, but their infrastructure remained. Dead stations and empty ships floated in orbit around the destroyed settlements. Chris organized teams to salvage everything useful. They stripped the stations down to bare metal. They reclaimed every computer and every power cell and every piece of technology they could find. It was grim work going through the wreckage where billions had died, but nobody complained. Every piece of salvage brought them closer to revenge. The moon was next. Earth's moon had been largely untouched for years because most mining operations had moved to the asteroid belt. Now it became a giant quarry. Huge machines tore into the surface and extracted materials needed for the weapon. The moon's far side was stripped bare in a matter of weeks. From Earth, the moon started to look different. Scarred and wounded like humanity itself, Amy Foster continued working in the command center monitoring communications. The Galactic Council had sent scout ships into the solar system to watch Earth. They wanted to make sure humanity was complying with their demands. Amy tracked the alien ships and fed false information to them. She showed them footage of Earth dismantling weapons. She sent reports about how humans were abandoning military facilities. She made it look like Earth had given up and accepted defeat. In reality, the opposite was happening. Earth was arming itself like never before, but the aliens didn't know that. They saw what Amy wanted them to see, and they believed it. They thought humanity was broken. They thought the broadcast had worked. They had no idea what was being built beneath the Rocky Mountains. 6 months after the attacks, Helen activated the first test of the weapon. They had built a small prototype about the size of a car. It couldn't reach across the galaxy yet, but it could work within the solar system. Ben had gathered biological samples from each of the Council species. The aliens had left some of their own dead behind when they attacked the colonies. Human salvage teams had collected the bodies and brought them. Back to Earth, Helen placed the samples on a small asteroid in the outer solar system. The asteroid was about 100 meters across. She programmed the prototype to lock onto the biological signatures in the samples. Then she activated it. The asteroid didn't explode. It didn't vaporize. It didn't do anything dramatic. 1 second it was there, and the next second it wasn't. The sensors showed nothing. No debris, no radiation. No evidence that the asteroid had ever existed. It was simply gone along with everything on it. Helen felt her stomach turn. The weapon worked. It actually worked. She had just proved that humanity could build a device capable of erasing species from existence. She made the announcement to the team, and there was no celebration. Everyone just nodded and went back to work. They had proved the concept. Now they needed to build the real thing. The full-scale version that could reach across the galaxy and target trillions of beings at once. General Crawford visited the facility that evening. She walked through the labs and workshops, looking at the weapon components being assembled. She stopped beside Helen and asked if she had any doubts about what they were doing. Helen answered honestly. She said she had doubts every single second. They were about to commit an act that would make them the villains of galactic history. They would kill trillions of beings who had never personally attacked Earth, children and families and innocent people who just happened to be part of the wrong civilization. Future generations would remember this and judge them harshly. Crawford listened and then nodded slowly. She said she understood and that she had the same doubts. But then she asked Helen what the alternative was. Should humanity just accept what happened? Should they dismantle their fleet and submit to alien rule? Should they let the deaths of 10 billion people go unanswered? Should they trust that the Galactic Council wouldn't decide to finish the job and destroy Earth anyway? Helen had no answer to that. Crawford put a hand on her shoulder. She said that sometimes there were no good choices. Sometimes you could only pick between bad options and worse ones. The aliens had forced this situation. They had shown humanity what they were capable of. And now humanity had to respond in kind, because anything less would be suicide. She gave the order to proceed with the full-scale weapon. Construction would take another 6 months. By then, the 1-year deadline would be almost up. The Galactic Council would send their delegation to Earth, expecting humanity's surrender. Instead, they would find something very different. Helen went back to work. The equations filled her screen again. Beautiful and terrible. The math that would end worlds. She pushed her doubts down deep and focused on the calculations. There would be time for regret later. Right now, there was only the work. Only the weapon. Only revenge. In the workshops below, Sam and his team assembled components with shaking hands. In orbit, Chris directed salvage operations that stripped the solar system bare. In the command center, Amy fed lies to alien scouts. All across Earth, humanity worked toward the same goal: Operation Alien. Instinct was moving forward, and nothing would stop it now. Captain Ryan Cooper had been running for 8 months, and he was tired of it. His ship, the ESS Defiance, was one of the few military vessels that survived the colony attacks because it had been on patrol in deep space when everything happened. Ryan and his crew had watched the broadcast just like everyone else. They had seen their friends and families die, and then they had spent the next 8 months playing a deadly game of hide-and-seek with Galactic Council. Patrol ships. The Defiance was a frigate designed for reconnaissance and fast attack. It wasn't built for prolonged combat against the massive warships the Council used. Ryan had learned to pick his battles carefully. Hit and run. Strike from the shadows and disappear before the enemy could respond. His crew had gotten very good at it, but they were all exhausted. The ship's hull was covered in scorch marks and patched repairs. They were running low on supplies and ammunition. They needed to go home. The message from Earth Command came through while they were hiding in the debris field of a destroyed asteroid mining station. Julie Sanders was the communications officer, and she called Ryan to the bridge with urgency in her voice. General Crawford's face appeared on the screen, and Ryan felt a wave of relief. Just seeing someone from Earth made him realize how isolated they had been. Crawford told him it was time to come home. She said Earth had a mission for him. Something important. Something that would end the war. Ryan didn't ask questions over an open channel. He simply acknowledged the order and set course for Earth. The journey back took 3 weeks, because Ryan had to take an indirect route to avoid Council patrols. When the Defiance finally approached Earth orbit, Ryan couldn't believe what he saw. The last time he had been home, the orbital space had been mostly empty except for a few civilian stations and some older defense platforms. Now it was filled with new construction. Hundreds of ships were being built. Massive weapons platforms bristled with technology Ryan had never seen before. Earth had been busy. They docked at a newly constructed military station, and Ryan was immediately escorted to a shuttle. It took him down to the surface. He expected to go to Earth Defense Headquarters, but instead, the shuttle flew to the Rocky Mountains. They landed at what looked like a normal research facility, but Ryan noticed the heavy security and the military personnel everywhere. This was something important. Colonel Ben Hayes met him at the entrance and led him deep underground. Ryan had heard stories about Site Omega, but he had never been there. The facility was enormous. Corridors stretched in every direction. Laboratories and workshops hummed with activity. Thousands of people worked around the clock on projects Ryan couldn't begin to understand. Ben brought him to a secure conference room where General Crawford and Dr. Helen Park were waiting. Helen looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly when she poured coffee. Crawford looked hard and cold, like she had win. Ryan saw her on the transmission. They explained the weapon to him, and Ryan listened in growing horror. The entanglement engine, they called it. A device that could erase entire species from existence. Helen showed him the technical details and the test results. She showed him footage of the asteroid that had simply stopped existing. Ryan understood enough physics to grasp what they were telling him. This was genocide on a scale that made the colony attacks look small. Crawford asked him if he understood what was at stake. Ryan nodded slowly. She told him that the weapon needed to be deployed at the heart of Council space. It had to be activated close to Council Prime, the capital world, where the government was based. That was the only way to ensure it would reach every member of every Council species across the galaxy. Ryan looked at the star charts Crawford pulled up. Council Prime was deep in enemy territory. It would take months to get there. The route would pass through dozens of systems controlled by Council forces. It was basically a suicide mission. Ryan said as much. Crawford agreed. She said he probably wouldn't make it back. None of his crew would. But if they succeeded, then humanity would win. The Council would be gone. Earth would be safe. 10 billion deaths would be avenged. Ryan asked for time to think about it. Crawford gave him 1 hour. He went back to the Defiance and called his senior officers to the briefing room. He told them everything: the weapon, the mission, the odds of survival. His pilot, Kevin Grant, spoke first. Kevin was a young man, barely 25 years old, but he was the best flyer Ryan had ever seen. Kevin said his parents had died on Mars Colony 3. He had watched them die on the broadcast. He was in for the mission. Linda Scott was next. She was the chief engineer, and she kept the Defiance running despite all the damage it had taken. Linda's husband and newborn son had been on Europa Station. She didn't say much. She just nodded and said she would go. Tony Blake handled navigation, and he was originally from Titan Colony. His entire hometown had been wiped out. Everyone he had grown up with was dead. He wanted revenge more than anyone. He was in. One by one, the crew volunteered. All 40 of them. Ryan felt proud and heartbroken at the same time. These people were willing to die for this mission. They understood they probably wouldn't come home, but they didn't care. The need for revenge was stronger than the instinct for survival. Ryan went back to Crawford and told her they would do it. She nodded and said the modifications to the Defiance would begin immediately. The ship would be equipped with experimental technology that pushed human engineering to its absolute limits. A quantum drive that could slip between dimensions and move faster than conventional engines. Hull plating that could bend sensor readings and make the ship nearly invisible. Weapons that used the same quantum principles as the main weapon. The Defiance would become a ghost ship, invisible and untraceable. The modifications took 4 months. During that time, Ryan and his crew trained constantly. They practiced the route through council space. They studied every species they might encounter. They learned how the new systems worked. Helen Park spent time with them explaining how to activate the weapon when they reached Council Prime. It was actually simple. Get within 10,000 kilometers of the planet. Press 1 button. That was it. The hardest part was saying goodbye. Ryan had a sister on Earth who worked as a teacher. Her name was Kate, and she came to visit him the day before launch. They sat in the observation lounge of the orbital station and looked down at Earth. Kate asked him if he was scared. Ryan admitted that he was terrified. Not of dying, but of what they were about to do. Kate held his hand and told him she understood. She said their parents had been on Mars when the attacks happened. She said she would carry that pain for the rest of her life. She said what Ryan was doing mattered. It wouldn't bring anyone back, but it would make sure the Council could never hurt anyone else again. The deadline was approaching fast. Earth had played its role perfectly. The Galactic Council believed humanity had accepted defeat. Diplomatic messages had been sent. Facilities had been dismantled in view of Council, scouts. Everything pointed to Earth's surrender. The Council was sending a delegation to formally accept humanity's submission and integrate Earth into their empire. Amy Foster continued to feed them false information from the command center. She sent reports showing Earth's compliance. She made it look like humanity was preparing for the delegation's arrival. She even sent requests for information about Council culture and customs to make it seem like Earth wanted to be good members of the galactic community. The aliens believed every word. They had no idea what was really happening. The night before the Defiance was scheduled to launch, Ryan found Helen in one of the labs. She was staring at the entanglement engine. The device was about the size of a small car, and it looked deceptively simple. Just a sphere of exotic materials surrounded by quantum processors. It didn't look like something that could kill trillions. Ryan asked if she was having second thoughts. Helen turned to look at him, and her eyes were red from crying. She said she had second thoughts every single moment. She said they were about to do something unforgivable. The Council species weren't all soldiers. Most of them were just ordinary people living their lives. They had children and families. They had dreams and hopes. They had artists and scientists and teachers. All of them would die because of what their government had done. Ryan sat down beside her. He understood what she was feeling because he felt it too. But he also remembered watching Titan Colony burn. He remembered seeing children running through the streets while alien soldiers hunted them. He remembered the systematic way the Council had destroyed every human settlement. They had chosen to attack civilians. They had chosen to make it as brutal as possible. They had wanted Earth to suffer. He told Helen that the Council had made this choice. They could have destroyed Earth's military fleet. They could have blockaded the solar system. They could have done 100 different things that didn't involve killing 10 billion civilians. But they chose genocide. They chose to make an example of humanity. And now, humanity was going to respond in kind. Helen nodded slowly, but Ryan could see she wasn't convinced. She asked what made humanity different from the Council if they were willing to commit genocide too. Ryan didn't have a good answer for that. Maybe there was no difference. Maybe both sides were monsters. Maybe that was just what war did to people. It turned everyone into the thing they hated. The next morning, the Defiance launched. There was no ceremony, no speeches. The ship simply detached from the station and accelerated away from Earth. Within hours, they had activated the quantum drive and slipped between dimensions. The journey to Council space had begun. Ryan sat in the captain's chair and looked at his crew. Kevin at the helm. Linda, monitoring the engines. Tony plotting their course. Julie, managing communications. All of them ready to die for this mission. All of them carrying the weight of 10 billion deaths. They were humanity's vengeance. They were the knife in the dark. And they were going to make sure the Galactic Council learned the most important lesson. Never corner a species that has nothing left to lose. The journey through Council space took 4 months, and every day felt like it might be their last. The Defiance moved like a ghost through systems controlled by species that wanted humanity dead. Tony Blake spent endless hours plotting courses that avoided the main travel routes. They stuck to the edges of solar systems. They hid in nebula clouds where sensors couldn't penetrate. They drifted through asteroid fields with all non-essential systems powered down. It was slow and dangerous work, but it kept them alive. The quantum drive that Earth's engineers had installed worked better than Ryan had hoped. It allowed the ship to slip between normal space and a strange dimension, where the laws of physics worked differently. They could cover distances in days that would normally take weeks. But the drive was temperamental. Linda Scott worked constantly to keep it running. She slept in the engine room most nights because the drive needed constant attention. Sometimes, Ryan would find her passed out at her station with tools. Still in her hands, they passed through the territory of the Krill first. The Krill were insect-like creatures that built their colonies on gas giants. The Defiance had to navigate through a system with 17 Krill worlds and hundreds of patrol ships. Kevin Grant flew the ship through a dense field of ice particles that orbited one of the outer planets. The ice played havoc with the Krill sensors, and the Defiance slipped through undetected. But it took 3 days of tense flying with everyone holding their breath. Next came Vorton space. The Vortons were an old species that had been part of the Council for thousands of years. They had massive space stations at every jump point. The stations were armed with weapons that could destroy a ship like the Defiance in seconds. Tony found a route through an area of space that the Vortons avoided because of dangerous radiation. The Defiance's new hull plating could withstand the radiation for a short time. They made the crossing in 6 hours and came out on the other side. Everyone sick from exposure, but alive. The close calls kept coming. In the Helix system, they were detected by a patrol ship and had to run. Kevin pushed the engines past their safety limits. The Defiance shook like it was coming apart. Linda screamed at him through the cum that he was going to blow the drive. Kevin ignored her and kept pushing. They escaped, but barely. When they finally stopped, the engine room was filled with smoke, and half the systems were offline. It took Linda and her team 2 days to make repairs. In the core system, they found something that made everyone stop and stare. It was the wreckage of a human colony ship. The vessel had been one of the generation ships sent out decades ago, carrying 10,000 colonists to a distant world. It had never arrived. Now they knew why. The ship had been torn apart. Bodies floated in the debris field. The colonists had been dead for years. The Council had been killing humans long before the broadcast. They had just hidden it better. Ryan ordered the crew to document everything. Julie took pictures and recorded video. They uploaded it all to a secure data cache that would automatically transmit back to Earth if the Defiance was destroyed. The galaxy needed to know what the Council had done. Even if Ryan and his crew didn't make it back, someone would find the evidence. They were 3 months into the journey when they passed through a system that had once been home to a species called the Narration. Tony had found references to them in old Council records. The Narration had been artists and philosophers. They had refused to join the Council's military campaigns. The records said the Narration had gone extinct due to natural causes, but when the Defiant scanned the system, they found the truth. Every Narration world had been bombarded from orbit. The cities were ruined. The population was gone. The Council had committed genocide before, and they would do it again. Humanity was just the latest victim. Julie started keeping a log of everything they found. She recorded the destroyed colony ship. She documented the dead Narration worlds. She noted the patrol patterns and the military buildup in every system they passed through. The Council was preparing for war. They had fleets gathering at strategic points. They were building new weapons platforms. They expected resistance from somewhere. Even if they didn't think it would come from Earth, Kevin spent his off-duty hours in the observation lounge, staring at the stars. Ryan found him there one night and sat down beside him. Kevin said he kept thinking about his parents. They had been teachers on Mars Colony 3. His mother taught literature, and his father taught history. They had always talked about how humanity needed to preserve its culture as it spread through space. They had believed in the importance of remembering where humans came from. Now they were gone, and Kevin was part of a mission that would erase 15 species from existence. He wondered what his parents would think about that. Ryan didn't have a good answer. He said that sometimes survival required doing terrible things. The Council had forced this choice on humanity, but Kevin shook his head. He said that was too easy. Everyone who did something horrible claimed they had no choice. The truth was harder. The truth was that they did have a choice. They chose revenge over mercy. They chose genocide over finding another way. And they would have to live with that choice forever, assuming they survived. The conversation stayed with Ryan for days. He found himself questioning the mission in ways he hadn't before. Yes, the Council had killed 10 billion humans. Yes, they had done it in the most brutal way possible. But did that justify killing trillions in response? Did it justify erasing entire species, including the ones that might not have supported the attack? Ryan didn't know anymore. Linda noticed that Ryan was distracted. She cornered him in his quarters one evening and demanded to know what was wrong. Ryan told her about his doubts. He told her he wasn't sure they were doing the right thing anymore. Linda listened, and then she told him about her son. The baby had been 3 months old when he died on Europa Station. Linda had only gotten to hold him a dozen times because of work schedules. She had missed his first smile because she had been on duty. She would never see him grow up. Never hear his first words. Never watch him become his own person. The Council had taken all of that away from her. She said she understood Ryan's doubts, but they didn't change anything. The mission was going to happen whether Ryan felt good about it or not. The weapon was armed and ready. They were already deep in Council space. There was no turning back now. The only choice was to see it through to the end. Ryan knew she was right, but it didn't make him feel better. They reached the outer edge of Council Prime's system 4 months after leaving Earth. Tony brought up the navigation charts and everyone gathered on the bridge to look. Council Prime was the 5th planet in a system with 12 worlds. It was beautiful. Blue oceans and green continents. White clouds swirling through the atmosphere. 3 moons hung in orbit around it. Massive space stations formed a ring around the planet. Hundreds of ships moved between the stations and the surface. This was the heart of the Galactic Council, the center of an empire that ruled half the galaxy. Linda checked the weapon status. The entanglement engine was fully charged and ready to activate. They just needed to get within 10,000 kilometers of the planet. That was the hard part. The space around Council Prime was filled with defense platforms and patrol ships. Getting close would be nearly impossible. Kevin studied the sensor readings and found a potential approach. There was a shipping lane that ran from the outer system to the planet. Massive cargo vessels used it to bring resources to Council Prime. The lane was busy enough that one more ship might go unnoticed. If the Defiance could mimic the sensor signature of a cargo vessel, they might be able to slip through. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot they had. Linda modified the hull plating to broadcast a false sensor signature. Julie hacked into the shipping schedules and created a fake identity for the Defiance. Tony plotted a course that would bring them into the planet on the standard approach vector. Everything had to be perfect, or they would be detected immediately. Ryan gave the order to proceed. The Defiance moved into the shipping lane and accelerated toward Council Prime. Kevin kept the speed exactly matched to the other cargo ships. They were just one vessel among hundreds. Just another delivery to the capital world. The defense platform scanned them twice, but accepted the false identity. They passed through the outer detection grid without incident. 10,000 kilometers became 8,000. Then 6,000. They were getting close. Alarms suddenly screamed across the bridge. Julie shouted that they had been detected. Something in their sensor signature had given them away. The defense platforms were locking weapons. Patrol ships were changing course to intercept. Kevin didn't wait for orders. He threw the Defiance into a series of violent maneuvers that made everyone grab for support. Energy beams cut through space where the ship had been seconds before. An explosion rocked the hull. Warning lights flashed across every console. Linda shouted that the engine room was venting atmosphere. She sealed the breaches, but they were losing power. Tony called out the distance. 4,000 kilometers. Still too far? Another explosion, and Kevin slumped forward in his chair. Blood spread across HFY's flight suit. Ryan jumped to the helm and took over. He wasn't as good a pilot as Kevin, but he was good enough. He pushed the ship forward through a wall of weapons fire. The shields were failing. Hull breaches were appearing faster than the automated systems could seal them. 3,000 kilometers. 2,000. The ship was dying around them, but they were almost there. Tony counted down the final distance. 1,000 kilometers. 500. Ryan could see Council Prime filling the view screen. A beautiful world full of billions of people who were about to die. Helen's voice came over the cum from the engine room. She said they were in range. She asked if Ryan was ready. Ryan looked at his dying crew and his burning ship. He thought about the 10 billion humans who had died in the colony attacks. He thought about all the species the Council had destroyed over thousands of years. He thought about whether revenge was worth the price they were paying. Then he gave the order to activate the weapon, the entanglement. Engine activated with a sound like reality tearing apart. Helen Park felt the weapon come to life. Through the ship's systems, and she knew in that moment that she had created something truly terrible. The device sent out a pulse that moved faster than light and stretched across the entire galaxy. It locked onto the quantum signatures of every species that made up the Galactic Council. 15 different species. 6 trillion individual beings, all connected by the invisible threads of quantum entanglement. And then the weapon pulled those threads and unraveled them from existence. It wasn't violent. There was no explosion, no screams, no pain. One moment the Council species existed, and the next moment they simply didn't. A soldier on a distant battlefield reaching for his weapon stopped existing mid-reach. A mother holding her child on a colony world vanished along with the child in her arms. An old being telling stories to youngsters faded away before finishing the tale. Across the galaxy, in the span of a single heartbeat, 6 trillion lives ended. They didn't die. Death implied that they had lived. These beings were erased, removed from the timeline, gone as if they had never been born. On Council Prime, the effects were immediate. The massive defense platforms that had been firing at the Defiance went silent. The patrol ships tumbled through space without pilots. The space stations hung dark and empty. The beautiful planet below continued spinning, but there was no one left to see it. The cities were intact but vacant. Buildings stood empty. Vehicles sat abandoned in streets. Everything the Council species had built remained. Only the builders were gone. Ryan Cooper stood at the helm of the dying Defiance and watched it happen. He saw the weapons fire stop. He saw the ships drift away powerless. He understood what it meant. The weapon had worked. Helen had succeeded. Humanity had won. But looking at the empty planet below, Ryan felt no triumph. Only a vast hollow feeling like something had been carved out of his chest. Helen's voice came over the come again. She was crying. Ryan could hear it in the way she struggled to speak. She said the weapon had performed exactly as designed. The quantum sensors showed the complete absence of the targeted biological signatures. The council species were extinct. All of them. Every man and woman and child. Every artist and scientist and farmer. Every person who had supported the attack on humanity. And every person who had opposed it. Gone. Erased. Dead by human hands. The Defiance was in bad shape. Half the crew was dead, including Kevin Grant, who had died at the helm, getting them close enough to activate the weapon. The ship was venting atmosphere from dozens of hull breaches. The engines were failing. They were trapped in enemy territory with no way to escape. But it didn't matter anymore. The mission was complete. They had done what they came to do. Linda Scott worked frantically to keep the life support running. She sealed what breaches she could and rerouted power from damaged systems. Tony Blake sent out a distress signal on all frequencies, hoping that someone friendly might hear it. Julie Sanders documented everything. She recorded the empty planet below. She recorded the drifting ships. She recorded the moment humanity became the greatest killers in galactic history. A response to the distress signal came 6 hours later, but it wasn't from Earth. A fleet of ships appeared at the edge of the system. Hundreds of vessels from species Ryan didn't recognize. For a moment he thought they were going to attack. The Defiance couldn't fight back. They were helpless. But the alien ships didn't fire. Instead, they sent a transmission. The face that appeared on screen was unlike anything Ryan had seen before. The being looked almost crystalline, with features that shifted like light through a prism. It spoke in a voice that the translation system struggled to process, but the message came through clearly enough. The being identified itself as Elder Kess of the Outer Reaches Coalition. It said its people had been watching from the edges of the galaxy. They had seen the broadcast of the human colony attacks. They had seen what the Council did to innocent people. And now, they had seen what humanity did in response. Elder Kess explained that the Coalition represented dozens of species that had suffered under Council rule for thousands of years. The Council had enslaved their worlds. They had destroyed cultures. They had killed billions over the centuries. The Coalition had fought back when they could, but they were too weak to challenge the Council directly. They had watched in helpless rage as the Council dominated half the galaxy. Until now, the Elder said that humanity had accomplished what the Coalition never could. The Council was gone. The tyranny was over. The galaxy was free. And the Coalition wanted to help. They wanted to be friends with humanity. They wanted to build a new galactic order based on cooperation instead of domination. Ryan listened to all of this, with a numb feeling spreading through his body. The Elder made it sound noble, like humanity had liberated the galaxy, but Ryan knew the truth. They hadn't fought a war. They had committed genocide. They had killed trillions of beings in an act of revenge. There was nothing noble about it, but he accepted the Coalition's help because the alternative was dying in space. Coalition ships towed the Defiance to a repair station in a nearby system. They treated the wounded crew members. They provided supplies and fuel. They sent messages to Earth explaining what had happened and offering friendship. The galaxy had changed in a single day, and humanity was at the center of that change. The news reached Earth 2 days later. General Crawford received the transmissions in the command center with Amy Foster and the other officers around her. They watched the footage of the empty Council worlds. They read the reports from the Coalition. They saw the proof that Operation Alien Extinct had succeeded. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the silence in the command center was deafening. Nobody celebrated. Nobody cheered. They had won by becoming the very thing they hated. Genocidal monsters who killed entire species. Crawford stood at the window looking down at Earth. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, blue and green and beautiful, but she knew that every person down there would carry the weight of what had been done. Future generations would grow up knowing that humanity had exterminated 15 species, 6 trillion beings, Children would learn about it in schools. Historians would debate whether it was justified. Philosophers would argue about the morality, but none of that would change what happened. The deaths were real. The extinction was complete, and humanity owned it. Lieutenant Chris Palmer asked what they should do about the coalition offer. Crawford turned from the window. She said they would accept. Humanity needed allies. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and Earth couldn't survive alone. They would join the coalition and help build whatever came next. But she gave an order that surprised everyone. She commanded that all data about the entanglement engine be destroyed. Every blueprint, every equation, every test result. The weapon would be dismantled and its components scattered across the solar system. No record of how to build it would remain. Ben Hayes objected. He said the weapon had saved Earth. It might be needed again. Crawford cut him off sharply. She said that some weapons were too terrible to exist. The entanglement engine gave whoever possessed it the power to exterminate species at will. That power couldn't be trusted to anyone, not even to humanity, especially not to humanity after what they had just done. The weapon had served its purpose. Now, it needed to disappear forever. Amy implemented the order immediately. She wiped databases and destroyed hard drives. She sent teams to Site Omega to dismantle the laboratories. Helen Park supervised the destruction of her own creation with tears streaming down her face. She had built something that should never exist, and now she was erasing it from history. It felt like the least she could do. The smallest act of atonement for the greatest crime. The coalition delegation arrived at Earth 3 months later. Elder Kess and representatives from 40 different species. They came with gifts and offers of technology sharing. They came with treaties and trade agreements. They came to welcome humanity into the galactic community. Crawford met with them formally and accepted their friendship, but in private she told Elder Kess the truth. She said humanity was not a hero. They were killers who had responded to genocide with genocide. They didn't deserve praise. They deserved judgment. Elder Kess listened, and then spoke words that Crawford would remember forever. The elder said that morality was complicated. The council had committed atrocities for thousands of years. They had killed and enslaved and destroyed without mercy. Someone needed to stop them. The coalition couldn't do it. But humanity could and did. Yes, it was terrible. Yes, it was genocide. But it was also survival. And sometimes survival required becoming a monster. Crawford wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words. Maybe the elder was right. Maybe in a universe where species committed genocide as policy, the only way to survive was to be willing to commit genocide in return. Maybe humanity had learned the most important lesson of galactic civilization. Power mattered more than morality. Survival mattered more than being good. The thought made her sick. Ryan Cooper and what remained of his crew returned to Earth 6 months after the mission. The coalition had repaired the Defiance as much as possible and provided an escort back to human space. Only 12 of the original 40 crew members survived. Kevin Grant was buried in space. So were the others who died getting the weapon into position. They were honored as heroes, but it was a bitter honor. They had succeeded in their mission, but the cost was measured in trillions of lives. Ryan visited Helen at Site Omega before it was completely dismantled. They stood in the empty laboratory where the entanglement engine had been built. All the equipment was gone. The walls were bare. Soon even the facility itself would be sealed and forgotten. Helen said she dreamed about the weapon every night. She dreamed about the 6 trillion people she had killed. Faces she had never seen. Names she would never know. All gone because of what she created. Ryan told her he had the same dreams. He saw the empty planet, the abandoned cities, the drifting ships. He had given the order to activate the weapon. He bore that responsibility. But he also knew that someone had to do it. The council would have come back. They would have destroyed Earth. Humanity had no choice except to strike first and strike hard enough to end the threat forever. Helen asked if he really believed that. Ryan was silent for a long time before answering. He said he didn't know what he believed anymore. Maybe they had no choice. Maybe there was always a choice and they just chose revenge over finding another way. Maybe it didn't matter because the deed was done and couldn't be undone. The council was extinct. Humanity survived, and they would all have to live with what that meant. Years would pass before humanity truly understood what they had become. The survivors of the Defiance would carry their guilt for life. The scientists who built the weapon would never forgive themselves. The military commanders who ordered the mission would question their decisions forever. And every human alive would know that their species had committed the greatest act of genocide in galactic history. They had exterminated 15 species totaling 6 trillion beings. They had done it in revenge. They had done it to survive. And they had done it knowing exactly what it meant. The galaxy would remember. History would judge. And humanity would live forever with the knowledge that, when pushed to the edge, they had chosen extinction over surrender. They had become the monsters the council feared they were. And in becoming monsters, they had saved themselves and doomed their souls.